Hey YouTube, Time Itself here. We spent a video looking at the operator's weapons, so now it's time to look at the mechanic. The same disclaimers apply. The stats will change, and I can't cover all the little details in one single video. That just doesn't make sense. So check out simtic.com for the updates and all the wonderful nerdy stats. This is an introduction, an overview, my opinion on how the guns fit together, what their different critical strengths and weaknesses are, the attachments to run on them, that sort of thing. I'll refer you to the operator primary overview that I did for the introduction to battlefield weapon stats and hardline attachments. So with that, let's talk about the mechanic's primary weapons. When players talk about hardline having a fast time to kill, I think it's the mechanics guns, the SMGs, they're really getting at. Because in Battlefield 3 and 4, the PDWs, the SMGs, they don't have nearly the close range damage that they do in hardline. Most hardline SMGs start out at 34 damage, but in Battlefield 3, you have 900 RPM PDWs that do 25, 20, and 16.7 damage. If you ask me what the primary balance consideration in Battlefield 3 and 4 for the weapons was, it would be damage at specific ranges per magazine. So you've got two weapon categories, assault rifles and carbines, and within them they've got the same number of rounds in each magazine, normally per gun, and then they have the same damage profile for all the guns, no matter what rate of fire they have, and instead recoil, reload times, that was the balancing factor there. But then you get to the PDW category and there's a lot more variety in damage profiles. You also got more variety in rate of fire in general, I'd say. But in making them close-range weapons, their close-range time to kill wasn't the major consideration there. Instead, it was a bunch of handling stats. But then Visceral comes along with Battlefield Hardline and takes a different approach and says, we want the close-range time to kill, the number of hits to kill, for these PDWs, these close-range weapons, we want that to be less than the other mid-range or long-range options. And to balance that out, we're going to make them less effective at longer ranges. I will say I think they needed to do something to make the mechanic more viable, because you don't need engineers running around with rocket launchers in hardline, at least not on every map. But it's put us in a bit of an odd spot, and it's going to take a lot of balancing patches, hopefully just slowly iterating to improve things to get things worked out to where players feel like they have some real good options in the mechanic category. But to sum things up, in hardline, the SMGs have low recoil. Most of the missing is caused by spread, actually. They have high close range damage, but a steep damage drop-off, kind of like shotguns. But they can be suppressed, which is, I think it's how I use all of them, and how I'd recommend using them unless you have some specific reason not to. Like, for example, say you're playing Hotwire, you're going to be in a car, everybody's going to know where you are, and the additional bullet velocity that you get without having the suppressor is actually going to be useful because everyone's driving around in cars moving really quickly. One balancing factor that's not immediately obvious are the available attachments for each weapon. It's really hit or miss. Only 3 SMGs even have the option to equip extended mags. One of them really needs it, the other 2 not so much. Only 2 have the option to equip stocks. One of those you're probably going to be running extended mags on, and the other one you should definitely run stock. Only 2 of them have the option to equip grips, and one of them really needs it. With the operator weapons, everything pretty much had these same options for attachments. It meant comparing the base stats made a lot of sense. With the SMGs, we have to be a bit more careful. So let's talk about some specific guns. Now in the operator video, I chose a baseline weapon and then compared the other guns to that. But for the mechanics weapons, what I want to do is a little different. I'm going to categorize them, and I'm going to do that by why I wouldn't want to try and kill a player at 20 meters with one of them. They're all pretty good at close range, but when you start trying to push the range out, that's where some of the differences are going to become much more apparent. So first up are 4 guns that drop to fairly low damage by 20 meters, 12 or less. That's going to be 8 hits to kill, or more in one case. So where better to start than with the starter weapon, the MP5K. For both factions, it comes equipped with the suppressor and the extended mags by default. Now you could swap the extended mags for the stock, but I think you really want those extra 5 rounds. The rate of fire is on the slightly higher side for the class, but still very controllable. I think this is a fine choice for the starter weapon for the mechanic class. It's otherwise fairly average for the class and does a very good job representing how the guns in the mechanic class are going to play. It does have a burst fire option, but in this case I think it's mostly just useful if you want some help in enforcing your trigger discipline. Because even with extended mags, it's easy to spend way too much time reloading with this thing. Next, the 1200 RPM bullet hose, the K10. It's practically a shotgun, isn't it? Well, except for the fact that, like most of the SMGs here, it doesn't have a whole lot of recoil. There's some spread, but instead it relies on that low damage to keep it from being more effective than it should be at longer ranges, and this is after the first patch. Still, it's kind of scary at times. It's just that rate of fire. You don't have to track someone for as long. If you can pull the trigger at the right time when you're on target, it'll just go right through people. However, pull the trigger when you're not on target and you'll find that you don't have any bullets left. But I still can't expect myself to kill any more than 2 people with a single magazine from this thing. This is another weapon with a burst fire option that's mostly just useful for enforcing trigger discipline. But in that case, you really cut down on this weapon's big selling point, that 1200 RPM. Though you will find that you won't just have your entire mag evaporate into uselessness if you miss the guy on the first trigger pull. So it's there if you want it, but I think you're really missing out on the main selling point of the weapon. Next up, the third and fourth guns for my low damage at 20 meters SMG category are the 2 of the worst guns in the game right now, the M45 and the Uzi, for the cops and criminals respectively. Visceral has already said that the second patch is going to include a, quote, new bullet for these 2 guns. I take that to mean damage buffs in some way, probably extending the damage out a little further, because right now it's super close range for both of these, and it does not justify the low rate of fire. And look, I know this is Uzi footage for the M45 section, but I just could not be bothered to try and play with the M45 anymore. But aside from the slow rate of fire, it's otherwise a fairly respectable gun. It has a larger magazine than the first 2 options we looked at, and the spread and recoil are very normal for the mechanics weapons. But the Uzi, oh man, well, they tried to make it slightly different from the M45, but what do they have to mess with? So what they wound up doing was giving it this weird spread. It has a slightly tighter base spread, but then a super high spread increase per shot, 0.3. That's twice of what I think pretty much anything else in the game is. It should come with the vertical grip by default, just like extended mags is default on the M45, and we're going to look at the P90 where the heavy barrel is the default there. This should have the vertical grip, but it doesn't. So you're either going to want a voucher, or you're going to suffer through getting 90 kills with this thing before you unlock the grips for it. And I'd say, don't judge this weapon until you've got the vertical grip on it. Just forget about whatever you did with this until you get that unlocked. Except you might as well just go play with the M45, because that's going to be a reasonable representation of what the Uzi will be like once you finally get that grip for it. These first 4, the low damage at 20 meters SMGs, these are the ones I'm going to say you should be running a suppressor on. If you're not, you should choose another gun. These are meant to be run with suppressors. That slower bullet velocity isn't going to mean much at the close ranges where these guns are effective. It's the same way you're not going to run a muzzle brake on any of these SMGs, there's no reason to, and you'd be insane for running a compensator. You have the option, and there is no better option, so why not? If you do find you need some more range when you're using these weapons, use the grenade launcher, use your sidearm. Heck, you can throw gas far enough that the multiplier for being in gas damage, you get double damage when you're in gas, that will actually be an effective strategy for killing someone with these guns at those middle ranges, 20 meters. One of the things that is super annoying with the Uzi is if you run into another mechanic running the armored insert and you want to go for headshots, but then you hold down the trigger on the Uzi for a couple shots and suddenly you're nowhere near accurate enough to reliably hit those headshots. You can lose a close range fight because you think you're being smart, and then you should just go for body shots because of that spread. But still, it's the low damage that kills the Uzi. My accuracy is 5 percentage points higher with the Uzi than it is with any other SMG. Slow rate of fire, low damage, you get lots of hits, but it just takes too long to kill people. Next up are a pair of guns that I probably wouldn't want to try to kill someone at 20 meters with because they have a really high base ADS spread. Sure, they've got enough damage at that range, but the base spread is simply high enough that it's going to be fairly unreliable. They are the P90 and the MPX. The P90 has a base ADS spread of 1.25 degrees. Now, at 20 meters, 1 degree is going to be 35 centimeters, more than a foot. The P90 comes with a heavy barrel by default, cutting that base ADS spread in half, which is great. It just means you'll be using a heavy barrel and not a suppressor. 900 RPM, 4-hit kill, good range, and then a modest damage drop off after that. Very respectable. The P90 is a good choice, but the MPX is definitely better and is probably the best mechanic gun we've looked at so far. Still 800 RPM, a 3-hit kill, out to 15 meters. I think they're going to cut this back in the next patch, but still, it's great right now. At 20 meters, it's still a 4-hit kill like the P90, but it's going to have less spread because it has 1 degree base instead of 1.25. Now that's great, but the MPX is also one of the guns that can run a stock. You have the option of the extended mags, but I don't think it's worth it here. Statistically, the stock is the same as a stubby grip, which reduces the penalty for moving and shooting, whereas the heavy barrel increases those penalties. So right now, if you want a fairly high rate of fire gun with 3-hit kill out to 15 meters, but possible to get kills at longer ranges, it's still got respectable damage, even at the minimum damage. In that close to medium range combat where having a suppressor is nice, being able to strafe constantly is great, having a slightly larger magazine is quite useful. The MPX is one of your best choices. And right now it looks like they're going to balance things out by just making everything more like everything else. The MPX is probably going to get a damage reduction. The Uzi and M45 are probably going to get a damage increase, at least in terms of range in both cases. And hopefully with some iterations and multiple balancing patches, they'll figure everything out. But for right now, the MPX is one of the top mechanic guns. I'd put it above the K10 right now, but that's just my opinion. Alright, the last two mechanic guns, if you ask me why wouldn't you want to try and kill a player at 20 meters with one of these, I'd have to say, I don't know, why not go for it? They are the UMP45 and the FMG9. The UMP45 is 600 RPM, just like the M45 and the Uzi, but it holds its 34 damage out much further, much more useful in that regard, and its minimum damage is quite high at 20, best in class. It has some options that most other SMGs don't. First, to equip a grip. Recoil is fairly low, so pick something that's going to help with the spread based on how you plan to use it. It also has a burst fire option. 600 RPM is pretty low, so it's not about maintaining trigger discipline. Instead, it's the same reason that we looked at with the operator video, in that you can help you get a lot of damage very accurately downrange, much faster than you would if you're just in single fire. All of these traits make the UMP45 the mechanic's most flexible weapon. Based on what accessories you choose and how you play with it, this can be anything from a close-range spray and pray from the hip to a longer-range burst fire, extremely accurate, competing with assault rifles and carbines SMG. Now, it's certainly not a replacement for those weapons, and you do certainly have to pick the right attachments to tailor it to whatever role you want. For example, if you want to push the range out there on this thing, you probably want a heavy barrel in order to cut down on that base .4 ADS spread. And then of course you still have 5 fewer rounds in the magazine as compared to most other options. And it doesn't have the potential to just absolutely vaporize people like the higher rate of fire 3-hit kill SMGs do, especially the K10. But that's what the gun does. It gives up a little bit of close range performance for some much improved mid and almost long range performance. This one might be just a bit underused. If you haven't given it a try, go ahead and unlock some attachments for it and have some fun. The FMG9 is a slightly reworked P90 without the downside of the high ADS spread. 18 fewer rounds, 50 more rounds per minute, and the maximum damage goes out a little further, minimum damage happens a little closer. It's a good weapon, and it's going to feel very consistent. Another very good weapon, definitely worth completing the Syndicate assignment for. Minimum damage is still the class standard 12, unlike the UMP's 20, but still, out to 25 meters, it's great. I want to thank you for watching. I hope this video was useful and informative. A big thanks to Synthic.com for the fantastic stats. Be sure to check them out for all the updates and more details, accuracy plots, all sorts of great stuff. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.